Support for the Nonprofit Lab comes from ambition, a strong desire to do or to achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work. It's the stuff that gets you up and keeps you going. Ambition. Find it located near a dream inside you. Welcome to the Nonprofit Lab, a podcast dedicated to the ongoing discovery of how we can all be a part of bigger social change through the lens of the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Puya Porak. I'm an industrial engineer, human-centered designer, and CEO of Match Nice, a social impact tech startup with a mission to connect the nonprofit ecosystem and maximize social impact. Thanks for joining us on our startup journey as we look to uncover and shake up the status quo in the world of nonprofits. My guest today is Lucia Kanter St. Amour. She's the Vice President for the United Nations Women USA, attorney of 25 years, international negotiations superhero, and best-selling author of For the Forces of Good, the Superpower of Everyday Negotiation. As a special needs parent, executive director of a grassroots nonprofit organization, law professor, and self proclaimed recovering CEO, she has traveled broad and deep territories on behalf of people who have been left out of discourse, decision, and design. In this episode, I speak with Lucia and we go to a lot of different places. We'll learn about her journey into the nonprofit sector as a founder, explore the inspiration and lessons learned in her grassroots nonprofit, the successes and challenges of building impactful programming as a smaller nonprofit, the similarities, differences, and connections in her leadership role and work as vice president of UN Women based out of San Francisco, and discuss the skills and power of negotiation specifically for women and how men can be better allies. Here's my conversation with Lucia. Lucia, welcome to the Nonprofit Lab. It's an honor to have you. I know you get hundreds of media requests to be on shows, and it means a lot that you've joined us today on the Nonprofit Lab. How are you?
I am just going and going and going, and that's just what I'm doing right now. And it won't always be this way. And as long as it's helping to serve other people and not just look at me, look at me, look at me, then I'm going to keep doing it. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and you're a force for good. Clearly, we see in the background you've got forces of good in the book that you wrote. Definitely want to get there, but before we go too deep, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey into the nonprofit sector. What is it that drew you in, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, I think it probably started when I was in law school. I did the civil justice clinic, and I represented a client there, a special education client. And there was something really deeply fulfilling about it because I thought, oh, this is really a good use of the training that I'm getting. This is someone who actually needs help, and that without my help, they wouldn't have gotten what they needed. And I was a couple of years into my law practice when I had an offer from an agency that did special education advocacy, and I actually wanted to take it. I think it paid something like 35,000 a year, and I had $35,000, 35,000 a year, and I had this other offer from a law firm. It paid, like 200,000 a year or something, and didn't want that one. I wanted the 35K job because I thought that's the job that matters. That's the work that matters. This other job, I'm just going to be helping wealthy people. I'm just going to be, like Steve Jobs, at the time, like Steve Jobs did not need Lucia's help. Other people did. And so I do think it started in law school, and I ended up with that same agency, staying on for 20 years, not working for them officially, but on their board, and became president of their board and stayed with them for 20 years. And then ended up, it's funny how the cards are dealt, isn't it? Having my first baby in 2004, who turned out to be a special needs child, severely special needs child. And I thought, interesting that this little incandescent soul landed with me, who is especially equipped to handle this. Doesn't mean it made it any easier. And so then now, of course, I'm doing all the early intervention and I have my second baby on my hip and it's really hard. It's grueling, it's brutal. And I'm meeting all kinds of other families, special needs families, and I'm sort of noticing, well, what are the resources out there? There's lots of resources actually for the special needs individual, not as much for the families affected. And so that's what then led to fast forward to 2014,
Hmm.
Spectrum Strategies for Autism. I founded that organization. It's a 501c3, and it's for the family members, particularly the siblings. And we'll probably talk more about it later. But so it's just one of those things where it started with one thread, and then you pull on that thread, and it leads to this whole territory that's rich and deep. And I think the theme was that I saw these needs and then these voids for filling them. And I went, can I do something about that? Given my education, given the resources I have, can I do something about that? And the answer was yes, I can, even if it's in just a small way.
Wow. Well, um, I don't I want to use the word destiny, but you were very in the right position to grow and foster and raise awareness to this issue and opportunity. And one of there's two things that you said that resonate in terms of themes in the podcast that I've been learning from incredible nonprofit leaders like yourself. The first thing that you said is you clearly didn't go into this for the pay. And,
Mhm.
one of the status quos in the sector is, of course, advocating for more competitive pay in the nonprofit sector for everyone that's working there. But it's this heart and the kind of magnetism of the cause that supersedes the income in a lot of cases for people working in the nonprofit sector with which I just admire so much as an entrepreneur myself. The other thing that you said that's very true is entrepreneurs in general, nonprofit or for profit, you see an opportunity in front of you, a challenge or an issue, whether it's from personal experience or something else. And you don't just say, oh, this is tough. You say, this is tough and I'm going to do something about it.
Right.
So I really commend you on that. So you founded Spectrum Strategies for Autism close to 9 years ago. Tell us a little bit about the mission and the work that you actually do there.
Right. And I just to respond in one little way to what you just said, it's like, where's the downside? If the need's not being met, and yes, it's tough. Well, what's the downside of trying?
Mm,
Okay, so you fail. Well, all right, we are in no worse position than people started, right? At least you tried and probably learned something. And so most likely progress was made. And progress is success. So no downside. That's my thinking about it. Now, spectrum strategies for autism, given that I had this second child who then I wondered, is he also going to have these problems? Like, am I going to have two of them? Right. He turned out to be neurotypical. And then I was noticing how many resources, his older brother drew from the family in terms of, a team of 14 therapists and all this attention and, needing to leave the pool or the restaurant or the movie theater because of a tantrum or some problem. And well, now we all have to go. And just all the attention that he needed and how I sort of went, well, what about the siblings? What's going, the siblings actually have the longest relationship of anybody with their sibling with special needs. It's a
mm,
relationship that spans 65 plus years. No other person, not the parent, has that long of a relationship. So there's one other person who preceded me back in the 90s, starting to do some sort of siblings workshops. He was out of Seattle, but otherwise there really wasn't anything out there. And I thought, oh, we need to change this. So let's create a space for the siblings where they are seen and they are heard and they can talk to each other. And it's not therapy, it's is therapeutic, and we have qualified people running these groups and they are structured, but they're also play. So they think they're just playing, but it's actually pretty structured. So there's the siblings groups, and I have had parents throw their arms around me with tears in their eyes and say, Lucia, this program has saved our life. Now, I talked about doing things in a small way. That's actually how you make a big difference. It's in
Mm.
small ways. And so we've probably served about 30 families. And you might say, well, gosh, that's not very 30 families, that's not very many. Well, it's 30 families and parents who have cried and said, this has saved our life. So to me, that is not small at all. And you never know what the reverberating effects will be of that. So then we have our other program is a dog matching program for families, not
Wow.
for a service animal. No, those are, like $20,000. No, this is where we help the family match with a rescue or a shelter dog. Has to be a rescue or a shelter dog, not a dog from a breeder. And then we fund the training of that dog with the family. They have to be involved in the training, and it's for a great family pet. So
Mm.
because that benefits all the family members, and there's plenty of science to support that. And then that's one of those, I guess I would call it the Pareto frontier, this idea of optimizing resources where, okay, you get a dog out of a shelter, which then opens up another spot in a shelter and also benefits the whole family. So you get a lot out of that. So that's an expensive program to run. We don't tend to match too many dogs, and there were no dogs to be had during COVID because everyone was adopting a dog. And our go-to places for dogs had waiting lists of 100 people. And then our third program is simply a parent buddy program where a parent can contact us and say, I'm this parent of this age with this. My child was just diagnosed at age 3 of this. And is there another parent who I can talk to? And then we got
Mm.
to go, okay, who do we know? Do you want a peer parent who's going through the same phases as you? Or do you want a mentor parent who's a few years ahead of you in the process? And then they sort of go, okay, who do we know? Who can we match you up with? So that's what Spectrum Strategies does.
Incredible. And might I add, I love your emphasis on the number, that the impact itself is so much greater. And what I'm learning from my conversations with leaders in the sector is there are different levels of magnification to social impact as a nonprofit leader. Like if you go all the way up to the Red Cross as an example, that's very highly magnified, and you kind of lose touch or the visibility to the stories, the impact that like your work is making directly. And I think your story is such a compelling call to action for people thinking about starting a nonprofit or just getting started, and asking themselves, well, what kind, like, how many people am I actually going to help? Like if you just help that one
Yeah.
person or that one family, that's
Yeah.
how it all starts.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's any less power to that. In fact, it might be even more powerful. One of my first episodes with Dr. Laura Otten, we talk about the nonprofit landscape, and there's this nonprofit she alludes to where they only focus on a cohort of like 10 individuals and do these holistic services to lift people up out of poverty, and they're way more effective, but the scale and the number of people that they're able to serve is a little smaller. So I commend you for actually you know, focusing on that core impact. How do you go from the idea of like, this is a need that I have with my family, to coming up with these three programs? How do you scale this over the years? How do you even get
Yeah.
started?
As with most things, it comes from a personal experience where you go, huh, I can't possibly be the only one experiencing this. Like, I know I'm unique in everything, but I'm not that unique. So what happened is, and I love dogs, and you're probably going to hear mine barking at some point. And
Mine too.
so um, I had just gone through two. We had two black labs, and they coexisted for 6 years. One was older, one was younger, and we both shelter dogs. And I trained the first one to be an autism companion dog for my son. It was not very hard to do, actually, with the right trainer. And then the second dog, who sort of learned from the first, when the first dog died, I went, well, you're going to have to like wear the vest now. And he took over, and he fell right into that role. And we had watched the first dog for so many years. And I thought, huh, now I just made that happen twice consecutively with two dogs for my son. I bet this could be happening for other people. And in the meantime, you see these documentaries and these programs out there for service animals, and they're really expensive. And you have to do a GoFundMe and and it's $20,000. And it's like, goodness, what, like,
Wow.
what if something happens to that dog? That's a $20,000 lot, right? So,
Wow.
okay,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a service animal. Like ours was not well, he got kind of was a service animal because he did perform specific functions. There are specific definitions for what's a companion animal, what's a service animal. I don't need to go into that right now, but it didn't need to be a service animal for the purposes of the program and to provide the benefit. And I thought, let's do this where it's affordable and it's providing the whole family some benefit. Because if I just made it happen for myself, we could be making this happen. That was enough proof for me.
Yeah, and so you're demonstrating this uncanny ability of many leaders in this space to see what's in front of them, test, pilot, kind of work the kinks out, see that, hey, this is possible for a one or two, and then work to scale that. And, congratulations on coming up on almost 10 years now for spectrum strategies for autism. But Lucia, you're an incredibly multifaceted leader as well. I know that you're also working for the United Nations Women. Can you tell us a little bit about the work there and the mission and your role?
Right. So I'm a vice president for UN Women San Francisco chapter, which is really neat because that's actually, I don't know if people know this, but that is where the United Nations was born in 1945 in San Francisco. So I'm really proud of that. It's really just an honor. And so UN Women USA is a national committee for UN Women, which is the umbrella organization under the UN. So, I mean, UN, massive organization, as you can imagine, that's all about global equity and economic empowerment for women and girls. And I mean, globally, with a real focus on developing countries and women and girls who are experiencing violence and ending violence against women and girls who are, say, the primary food providers for their communities, the farmers on land to which they have no rights, by the way, and are disproportionately impacted by climate change. You don't think about that, right? Well, they are, and nature is also their pharmacy. So that means then they don't have medical care, then they are more likely to turn to sex trafficking for resources, less likely to be educated because of that. And it's a connection I don't think a lot of people think about: climate change and these women and girls in developing countries who provide the food. And also something called a He for She campaign, which is about, you're nodding your head, so you're familiar with that.
Yeah,
Okay,
I've
good. That's
signed
about,
that
yeah,
petition.
it's
Yeah.
the allyship of men, going out there and being, you are also promoting this equity and economic and empowerment. So those are a few of the programs that UN Women does. And then the national committees, I think there are 10 national committees. So this is UN Women USA, there's UN Women Iceland, I think there's UN Women Canada. And so we assist with that.
That and you're in such a unique position to speak to the levels of magnification piece that I was just talking to, from your experience and working hand in hand with children and families in your own nonprofit, and now also working at this global initiative at UN Women. What are some of the things that you carried from your experience from founding your nonprofit, your smaller nonprofit, to UN Women, and vice versa? What are some of the things that you've taken away from seeing this global operation down to your local nonprofit?
There are a lot of crossovers, and then there are some differences that are probably obvious. One of them is just size, right? So if I have my own organization, Spectrum Strategies, and I'm the founder and the executive director, I can do whatever I want. I don't have to check with anybody. I mean, I've got a board of directors, but they're really more advisory. So things can happen pretty quickly and efficiently if we've got the funding, which is a separate topic that I'm sure we'll talk about. Not so with UN Women or UN Women USA. It's a massive organization. I can't even really post something on LinkedIn, lest it be seen as me speaking for the organization and I could get into trouble. You have to be really careful about what you say, who you say it to. Is it
Mhm.
authorized, can't use their logo in any way. You have to check with someone constantly, and things take a lot longer. It's just a bigger, clunkier organization where the communication doesn't always function the way one would hope that it would, right? It's particularly compared to a smaller organization. The two different organizations, what they have in common though, is a need for really solid governance and solid boards of directors. So I've been on several boards of directors now, and I have yet to see, for example, a single one of them who knows how to follow Robert's Rules of Order. They've all got Robert's Rules of Order, and I will always ask at the beginning. I say, I see that you use Robert's Rules of Order. Do you actually know how to use Robert's Rules of Order? Because you know what, no one really does. It's impossible to understand. And every time they say, "Oh yes, we know how to," and then I get in the first board meeting and I'm like, "Yeah, no, they don't. They don't know
Wait,
how to do
can I
this." Yeah.
pause you there?
Mm-hmm.
What is Robert's Rule of Orders? I actually just today got a letter that I was accepted to join a nonprofit board. So sounds like something I should know.
It is the has been the go-to process for how decisions get made, and it's based on the old parliamentary system in England. And it's
Interesting.
arcane. It is, and I'm an attorney saying this. It is really difficult to understand. I don't understand it. I think I understand it a little better than the average bear, but even I don't understand it. So what I've sort of gently suggested in a couple of organizations I've been successful in adopting is the modern rules of order. And I
Mm,
believe those are published by the American Bar Association. And it's much less focused on motion practice and consensus for decision making. It's just a lot easier to understand. So there's the governance piece, which is, what governance rules do you have? Do you have like a board policy manual where everyone understands the rules of conduct?
right.
Are you properly following your governance rules? Are you properly following and enforcing your board policy manual and your conduct? And who have you got on your board? Let's be clear. Is this an advisory board? Is this an active board? Because let's get people who are there for a purpose. They're not just filling a seat. You're not just a warm body. I expect you to do something. Even if it's just contributing money, I expect that. And if you're not contributing money, then you're contributing something else. But you're not just showing up. And I've seen an awful lot of that. The people who are just showing up, but they're not delivering on the larger scale and the smaller scale. They have that in common.
Not surprising. I appreciate you breaking down kind of the history of the boardroom legislation, to so to speak. And I agree with you towards this more modern trend. And one of the other status quo practices in the sector is this kind of, yeah, keeping warm bodies at the board table, where we really need more dynamic, involved board members. And you hit the nail on the head, whether that's financial contribution or of talent and network and connections. It needs to be more than just showing up to that meeting once every month or whatever that cadence is. I'm also really curious, especially because the United Nations has set forth the Sustainable Development Goals as part of 2030. It's this kind of grand measurement targets across all these cause areas. Of course, you're highly familiar with that. How do you see impact measurement varying between the work that you do at UN Women, and how you're able to measure impact with your own nonprofit? Can you speak a little bit to the complexities of impact measurement between the two organizations?
It's pretty complex. I think it really, a lot of it boils down to execution and enforcement. So you can make these grand agreements, at the bigger UN level, or the bigger, NATO level, whatever, fill in the blank, some big, multinational organization where representatives all come to agreement. Well, then they've got to go back. Well, then people have to follow through. So how do we hold them accountable to that? Who is impacted by that? Whose go ahead do you need back home to make it happen? What kind of funding you need to make it happen? What kind of politics are involved in terms of just constituency saying, oh, so you're going to fund this environmental goal, and that means you're taking away from, some other infrastructure for highways, or education or something, and saying that you're not checking in with them with your constituency. So that's where I have a lot of questions myself, which is you make these grand agreements on a large scale, and then you go back home and, well, who are the other third parties who are impacted by it, who are actually the people who have to make it happen? Do you have the budget for it? Where's that coming from? Are you going to have to increase taxes for it? You're going to get pushback for that. So that's where it really gets complex. And so we can make these sort of grand statements that we read about in the New York Times about these goals and these agreements. Well, okay, is it realistic? Can we deliver? Can the individual parties to that agreement, how are they going to deliver that? And I don't know the answers to those questions, but I have them. So I'm not sure if that quite addressed what you were asking, but I think it probably got close.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting the challenge that exists with um, the zoom out level impact data. Like how with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, you have these grand global country level goals that governments are being kind of challenged to do, but then who's doing that, right? And part of the mission at Match Nice is to connect the nonprofit ecosystem. So looking at the nonprofits' role in that, communities' involvement, businesses, and government. How do we connect the dots between all of these players to more kind of in a more synchronous way work towards meaningful change and not just kind of focus on putting the band-aids on issues, but really looking at some of the root causes. So if zooming out, it's very challenging. I agree. Now zooming down close, talk to that impact measurement from kind of your SSA, your nonprofit level. How do you look at impact there?
Right. And it's challenging there too. And a lot of it comes down to something I just mentioned, which is just funding. It's just, do you have the resources? So let's talk about the dog matching
Yeah.
program. Uh, a dog match for a family runs us $1,000. Well, okay, so I need $1,000 to make that happen. And it has been very, very challenging. It's like a pretty simple program on its face, but it's got a lot of moving parts. So we've got, especially to do it well. I mean, you
Mhm.
can do something, and then there's doing it well. And I intend to do it well, meaning we have a behaviorist who goes and visits that family, sits down with them. They're assessing the home. Is this going to be a safe place for a dog? Is that they have experience for a dog? They're doing a whole sort of intake process. I don't like that word intake because it's like that's what a car does, intake. But an information gathering process. So we're really honing in on what's this family about? What do they need? Um, are they going to be an okay family with the dog? Have they thought this through? They go through a detailed questionnaire to answer questions that they haven't necessarily, if they haven't thought about them. Do you have, at least $500 a year for supply? Like, we'll start you off with the supplies, but
Yeah.
then veterinary bills and things that come up, like dogs cost money. If you go out of town, who's going to take care of this dog? So we start there, and then with a behaviorist. And then there's the, okay, now I got to find a dog. Well, what kind of dog do you want? Well, it has to be, less than 35 pounds, and it can't, no excessive
Right.
barking. So all these requirements. And then, all right, let's go find that dog. And like I said, during COVID, you couldn't get a dog, so we're competing for dogs with, that, like Pets for Vets, right? The
Wow.
same
Yeah.
kind of temperament of a dog that everyone else also wants. Now we tend to get a little jump in line because we're like, hey, we're this nonprofit, and shelters feel like they're doing something good. Okay, so now we got to train the dog. So now it's finding the trainers, and trainers deserve it. They should be paid. These are professionals, so, but I have to make sure I can pay them, and that the family understands you're involved in the training. What type of trainer are you? Are you, I think it's called a 3R trainer, which is like a
Okay.
positive rewards trainer versus, that dog whisperer guy who's more punishment based. Like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to pair you with a family. I just disagree with that.
Right.
So all of these things have to happen for something that's a pretty simple idea. And it's not that easy, actually.
Right. And communicating those needs effectively and clearly to donors, I am recognizing can also be a challenge for many nonprofits. And one of the goals and vision for MatchNice on our fundraising platform side is to help nonprofits more transparently communicate what they're working on, the ins and outs, and the things that are not sexy to look, right? Like the overhead costs of everything you just mentioned to even get this program
Yeah.
up and running, not to
Well,
mention then
to set them up for success,
right,
right? That's what we want to do. We don't want returning dogs, right?
right.
We do this to set. I have not had a dog returned because we are going through this painstakingly, and what it's difficult for donors because I'll give you an example. I had a donor who was very interested in our program. Said, "I want to fund your program," and
Yeah.
she did big donations. And I filled out all their information. I did the prospectus. I did it all. And when she saw the cost per dog, she turned us down. She said, for that amount of money, we can vaccinate X number of dogs. And it was,
Mm.
like hundreds of dogs. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, that's not really a fair comparison, right? That's not what we're
Right.
doing. But her point, I understood her point, which is this is not like bang for the buck. This is not really scalable. If this is only, if $10,000 is only quote unquote, air quotes there for people listening and not watching, going to fund 10 dog placements, it's quote unquote not worth it.
Hmm.
So
To
that's
that
what we
donor.
run into.
Yeah, so how do you overcome those conversations? Because it seems like you've taken a very transparent approach in your conversation with major gift givers or even just any donors to say, hey, here's what we're working on. This is our program. This is what it's going to take for us to be set up for success. And then
Mhm.
here's what it's going to take for us to manage and continue the long term success of the program. This is the per family cost, whatever we break it down to. How do you, talk us through like your approach in terms of communicating those needs to donors, and how do you navigate the situation where a donor does push back and say, "Hey, oh, like, I don't know about that." Because one of the another status quo, I keep bringing these up, is donor focus on overhead expenses versus mission delivery, right? Like
Right.
being fixated on this like number, but kind of losing sight of the impact that it could have. So, how are you communicating that kind of ROI to donors?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I do is I acknowledge their concerns. I say, you're right. I'm not going to argue with you. I say, yeah, I get that. Empathy goes a long way. Yes, I, it's a valid point. I appreciate that perspective. And not but, and we have seen the impact this has for a family and then the ripple effects it can then have. Now, the problem is that's not really measurable, is it? And they want something that's measurable. And so we usually sort of end up back with the, well, for just one family and just one dog. And the other thing I am very clear to communicate is I don't make any money. I do not draw a salary. This is a completely volunteer. My No one else draws a salary.
Hmm.
I have to pay. The behaviorist doesn't draw a salary. She does volunteer, go in and meet with that family. I have to pay the shelters. Generally, they do not waive their fee. They're barely holding on too, and if they're only charging say 250 or 350, they have a lot of expenses themselves. They're barely hanging on. So I've got to pay the shelter. I've got to pay the dog trainer. That is not a high paying gig, a dog trainer. So um, those are just actual costs, and I cannot expect those people to volunteer or waive those fees. I volunteer my time. I'm not, the cost of it is the cost. There's no padding there. So when you ask me, well, how we overcome that, and you're not going to like the answer, well, we haven't. I've done maybe 10 dog matches, not even that. We have not overcome it. And that's okay. It is what it is. That is an expensive program. Siblings
Yeah.
program, not so much. Parent buddy program doesn't cost anything. So we've got this spectrum of
Hmm.
programs from, very expensive to free, no overhead.
Is there something that you think that donors would want to see that they're not seeing to kind of get them over the hump of investing in an expensive program like this?
I think that it helps if there's something in it for them. So here's an example. We started partnering with Pet Food Express, where this is a really neat program. They have I forget what it's called actually. I don't know if you've ever been in a Pet Food Express, and they have those huge banners on the wall of a pet, someone's pet, and it has like a professional photo of this pet and some like action shot, right? And
Okay.
then the name of the pet, like this is Sydney. And I've often wondered, like, well, who are those dogs or cats or fish or turtles, whatever, could be anything. Well, turns out they have this program where um, it's bothering me that I can't remember the name, but all right, stay focused, Lucia. If you donate to a like a shelter or some sort of animal organization, and it's a nonprofit, a $250 donation, then you show your receipt to Pet Food Express. I made this $250 donation to Spectrum Strategies. Then they will, it's free, send a professional photographer to your house to photograph your dog, and your dog or cat or horse or duck, whatever, gets to be on one of these huge banners that goes up in one of the stores with their name and everything. And then it's displayed for, I don't know, 3 months or something. And then they give it to you and you get to keep it. I'm like, now that's smart. So like my negotiation mind is going, that's smart. That's another Pareto frontier.
Mm.
And that's something in it for them. It's like publicity of their pet. So people love that. They actually love it. So it gets back to the other types of donors. Well, what is in it for them? Is their name going to be out there? Are they going to be getting, are they going to garner more business because of it? Will they get some good recognition out of it? That can help.
Right. Identifying what is that driving motivation for the donor as part of that conversation for sure. And you've mentioned this term Pareto frontier a couple of times now. What is that?
Oh gosh, what was his name? I think it was Gilfredo Pareto. He was an Italian economist, and it was this idea of people. You've heard people say, "Well, expand the pie, negotiation, fixed pie, expansive pie, expand the pie for a win-win outcome." And he's like, not just win-win. He's like win-win-win-win-win. Like let's maximize the resources in a way that optimizes the outcome. That is a Pareto frontier. It's like an idea of economics.
I love that. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Pareto rule around kind of the 80-20 rule of thumb. Thanks for educating me on that. That was very interesting. We've been dabbling in this subject, not really dabbling, talking about negotiation. You wrote a wonderful book called For the Forces of Good, the Superpower of Everyday Negotiation. What is it that actually inspired you to write this book? And can you give us a little bit of a synopsis?
Sure, I'd love to. I people have been saying for years you should write a book, and I'm like, oh please, we don't need another book. Do we really need another book? Like, there's so much noise out there in the blogosphere. Like, I don't need to be adding to it. And I taught negotiation at two University of California law schools for 10 years. I'm actually still on salary. I'm still on staff there. I just don't have a regular course. But I go in and I do coaching and things like that. And I noticed I can't believe it took me so long to notice this, but I finally noticed just last year that every single assigned reading for all the years I taught had been authored by a white male expert,
Hmm.
not a single woman, not a single person of color. And I was like, whoa, how is that possible? And how did I not notice that sooner? It just shows how insidious it is that, well, men negotiate, that it's a man's field, and men in business and big mergers and acquisitions, and it's for the C-suite and the MBA and the sales and marketing professional and the attorney, right? And guilty as charged, right? But I thought, yeah, this is not right. This is not right. No wonder people feel so helpless to negotiate. A lot of people can't stand negotiation. They equate it with conflict, actually, or they think it's gauche, but they
Hmm.
avoid it, especially in our culture here in the United States. They avoid it, and the demographic that particularly avoids it is women. I have met too many women who don't even know how to ask for something, don't in fact know that they are allowed to ask for something. And
Hmm.
I'm like, wait, what? Time out on the field. Well, what do you think is going to happen if you ask? Like, are you going to be smited? Are you going to dissolve like the wicked witch made of brown sugar? What is, and so I was like, wow, this has got to change. And so not only do we need more women writing about negotiation and global negotiation experts, we need a book that isn't written for, or I should say, isn't written by that C suite for that same audience. We need something that is speaking to those who have been left out to say, hey, this is not just for business. It is everybody's business. It is your business. From when you wake up in the morning in the bedroom, down to the kitchen, to your kids' school, over to the grocery store, into the workplace, negotiation is everywhere, every day. And one of the reasons that you don't feel competent and confident to negotiate your salary, which is the number one request I get. And the first thing I say is, back it up, sister. Let's not call it salary negotiation. Let's call it compensation package negotiation, because salary is just one aspect of it.
Mhm.
The reason you don't feel competent to do that is because you have not been practicing negotiation in low stakes, everyday, familiar contexts.
Mhm.
And that's how you get good at it. It's easy to look at someone like me and, look at my LinkedIn profile and say, well, that's easy for you to say, Lucia, you're an expert. You're a global expert. Well, I wasn't born this way. This is not some otherworldly skill, or I was bitten by a radioactive spider or something. I've been practicing it for a long time, and I'm still practicing it. And I practice every day. It's like the plank rows, right? If you want the six-pack abs, you don't get them by sitting on the sofa and watching the workout video. You got to do the plank twists, and you do them every day. So the book is about saying, hey, especially all you women out there, negotiation is not a dirty word or a dirty act. You need to be doing this. You need to be doing it often. You need to be doing it every day. Here's how. And I made it sexy and fun and artistic, and it's visually pleasing. It's fashionable. It's very much, it's for anyone. I'm really hoping it will inspire more women, though. Notice it didn't say empower.
Mhm.
They don't need me to empower them. They already have it. You have the power in you. It's already there. You're just not tapping into it. You don't need me. I don't want you to need me. I don't want you to hire me. All you got to do is buy this book and then practice. Not enough to know it. Got to practice it. It's like a batting average. The best hitters in baseball, the best like Hall of Fame hitters in baseball, their batting averages don't go north of 350, meaning for all the non-baseball people, for every 10 at bats, they only get a hit 3.5 times. All right. Well, what's happening the rest of the time? They're striking out, they're getting a base on balls, they're doing a fly out or a foul out. Something other than a hit is happening. And those are the best guys. So you just got to do it a lot. You got to step up to the plate a lot. And you don't have to be one of the best guys. You could just be an average guy and get, a couple hits. You could be a 200 batting average, and that's still better than what you're doing now.
Wow.
I know that's a lot, right? I'm very passionate about it. And it's
Clearly.
consistent with the UN women stuff, because this is women and girls have been disproportionately impacted and hurt by not negotiating and being left out. They have been left out of negotiation. Let's be clear. And that ends now.
You mentioned allyship is a very important part of this. How do you think men can be a bigger part of this movement besides being aware of the biases and discrepancies and the gaps that exist at the
Mhm.
negotiating table? How can someone like me be a part of the solution?
I talk about this actually in the book. It's the only book I know of on negotiation that includes a whole chapter on negotiating with bullies. And a lot of that has to do with allyship. And so I mentioned that and what allyship really looks like, because allyship doesn't mean the quiet allies in the background going, you got this. I'm rooting for you.
Hmm.
No, it means those who will stand up right next to you and right in front of you, and they will risk their position in the fraternity for something greater, for equity, for progress, for something that you're striving for. And they'll say, nope, that's not cool. That's not how we play in this community. All right. And that's not happening because it's scary to risk your place in the tribe. So you have a lot of the quiet allies in the background.
Hmm.
That's not allyship. You got to be the one in the meeting to say, don't interrupt her. Men interrupt women 4 times more often than the inverse. Don't interrupt her. That's one small way that you can be an ally. Start by saying, don't interrupt her.
And it plays back to what you're saying around the smaller exercises of Like when you said that, the first thing that came to mind was me ordering, like getting a burrito at Chipotle or whatever, and be like, "Could I get that extra scoop of salsa,
Yeah,
please?"
right,
But then translating that into negotiating a compensation package, of
right.
course, takes a lot of practice. And I appreciate you being part of this movement and the voice and how it's reflecting your mission across all of these different organizations. As we look to wrap our conversation, I'd love to try to weave these incredible leadership roles that you are embodying as a leader in the space for negotiation for women's equality and rights through UN Women, through your nonprofit. Uh, how do you what do you think in terms of negotiation that you're raising awareness to and teaching? How do you think that those negotiation skills really need to translate better into the world of nonprofits? How can nonprofits leverage those negotiation skills better when it comes to
Mhm,
their own payroll, fundraising, marketing,
mhm.
etc.?
Yeah. So here is something that I think nonprofits raising money might have in common with, say, an employee who wants to negotiate a pay increase. Now, typically, what an employee will do is go and say, I want a pay increase, and they'll say all the reasons why they deserve and want a pay increase. Okay, that's not really the way to go about getting a pay increase. What you need to do, okay, first of all, first we have to understand that employers think employees are greedy.
Hmm.
They already think you're greedy. What you need to do is go in and say, I have these ideas. Here's the more value. I can bring more value to you. Here's how. And here's what that would look like in terms of increased pay for me. And here's a timeline for like you've got a plan. You have thought about them.
Hmm.
And it's the same with raising money. It's not just going with a handout saying we need money, give us money. And here's all the great things. Look at us, look at all the great things. It's first being curious about them and showing them, the prospective donor, I know what you're about. I've done my research. Here's what I being really specific about. Here's what I like about what you're doing here, showing that you are interested in them. How do you expect people to show interest in you unless you show curiosity about them first? You have to be the first and what you're going to give them. That then triggers reciprocity, the reciprocity principle, among other things, but that's what gets it all going. And then if the answer is no, that's not necessarily the end. The question is, what are some of the obstacles? What about this doesn't work? There are more questions to ask that can then lead you down another potential path of negotiation. Is there anything else? What else might be in the way? How could we ameliorate those obstacles? So those are some off the top of my head, what occurs to me.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and it is just so clear that the relationship and that approach of trying to find reciprocity, being mutually interested, and like it never works to just be like
Yeah,
me
right.
on
If
that
you show
front end.
interest in other people, here's the great irony about it. You're going to love this, Puya. They will think you're fascinating. So there's this wonderful story about this guy who another really well known negotiation expert out in the world tells this story about the man who said to his wife before they were going to the party, I got to spend the whole evening just reflecting back what people say. That's it. Just saying, oh, tell me more. Oh, that's it. Oh, two kids, both in high school, two black labs, and then it gets them talking more, right? He did that all night, never talked about himself, never. And people were going up to his wife saying, your husband is fascinating. And they loved him. Like they want to do things for him. So that's how it works. And asking questions that are calculated questions, not to entrap people or to persuade people, but they're curiosity questions, they're information gathering questions. They're, what do you mean by that? Tell me more
Mhm.
about that. What would it take to fund 10 dogs? What would it take to get the elephants to stop eating the crops on the rural place in Africa so that you could provide the food to your community? Oh, a fence? You need an electric fence? right? Something like that. What would it take?
Hmm.
Asking the right questions, the right way at the right time.
And being authentic and genuine about it. And
Yeah.
that's it's there's so many parallels between what you're doing across all of your initiatives and organizations and the book that you've written. And I really hope that my audience here is also finding those connections in a tactical way for the work that they're doing on the ground. Lucia, what's one status quo in the nonprofit sector that you'd like to see changed?
I I would like to see still a little more diversity, I think. And I'm very aware of my white privilege, and that's something I kind of really keep an eye on, like especially the UN women work. Like, okay, is this like the white savior thing? Like, how many? And I look around on the boards I'm on, like, all right, is everybody here white? Like, can we? I'm really very aware of like, are these all white faces on this call? And I still think too often there are too many of the white faces and that sort of savior, and we're going to help the kids in Africa. And we need, it's just like any ecosystem where biodiversity makes it better, makes it stronger. We need that same thing in the nonprofit space. And it's that diversity, that adhering from those diverse backgrounds and perspectives, that does make it a little more time consuming and complex. Ultimately, though, if you can put in that recruitment and that the time, you will be stronger for it. And then investing in taking a look at your governance policies and protocols, and who you're recruiting for your boards. Be really purposeful in who you're recruiting. Why are they there? And what are they going to do?
I sincerely appreciate the transparency around that. And, I talk about the importance of diversifying funding sources, but also this importance of diversifying your board and the makeup and composition of the leadership of a nonprofit organization is very, very important. I'm glad that you brought light to that as we're looking to wrap up this episode. Maybe the second to last question I'll ask you, Lucia, is there anything you wish I asked you that I didn't?
Oh, no. I've just been, I have just been present in the moment. And
I
there's
can
something
tell.
so very fulfilling about that. I've just been right here with you, like my whole life led to this moment, and I'm not thinking of anything else. So it's been
That
great.
is a very strong skill to have. And I am grateful for you sharing that presence with me and being able to share this with our audience. One final question for you, Lucia. What do you want your lasting legacy to be?
I've said it and I'll just say it again. We make big changes in small ways. And if you're waiting for your big moment on an international stage or a national stage to make a big impact, you are squandering everyday opportunities in your own little pocket of the world. That's how we make big change, and without seeking recognition, without even necessarily having to post it on social media. We make big change in small ways.
And those small ways ripple through time and space in ways that we can't even comprehend. And I
Yeah,
really,
don't worry
really,
about that. The universe will take care of that. You do
yes,
what you can from where you are.
100%. Well, Lucia, you are such a light in the world. Thank you for sharing some of that shine with me and the audience today.
You do know that's what my name means, right? Lucia means light. That's the, yes. So yes, and then Amour, Saint Amour, that means love. So my name literally means light and love. I hope I'm living up to it. I think I am.
Yeah, it seems like it. Well, what an amazing way to end the episode. Lucia, I'm so grateful for your time, the space, everything you're doing. Thank you for your continued efforts. Thank you for sharing your light with the world.
Puya, thank you for inviting me. And it was, as Hemingway would put it, a true moment in time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Nonprofit Lab. Be sure to check out the episode description for links to Lucia's website, where you can learn more about her and her book For the Forces of Good. I hope you found something new and insightful in this episode, or even if it was just a little moment of reflection that made you go, yeah. With that, Here's the quote to wrap up our episode. This one from the poet laureate, Amanda Gorman. There is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you for tuning in. Be that light in the world. If you enjoyed this or other episodes, please feel free to like, subscribe, rate, and share our podcast with other servant leaders in your life. And until next time, be well.